She was the pastor's sister, untouched, forgotten, dressed in mourning for 3 years. But when Jack stepped off that train, tall, broad-shouldered, marked by life, something inside her woke up violently. One look was enough. An accidental touch set everything on fire, and when he whispered in her ear, "You're small, but I fit inside you," Mindy knew she was lost, or maybe, for the first time, found. This is the story of a woman who chose desire over guilt, and of a cowboy who taught her that being touched isn't a sin, it's being reborn. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and become a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, also click the Super Thanks button. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us keep bringing stories that move you. The train pulled into Silver Creek at 3 in the afternoon, but it was as if the town's clock had stopped, right along with the locomotive's final whistle. Smoke still rose lazily when Jack Monroe stepped down from the car, and it was like a silent thunder had torn through the clear sky of that spring Saturday. He wasn't just tall, he was commanding. His broad shoulders filled the space around him, as if ordering the air itself to step aside. His boots hit the wooden platform with a firm, deliberate rhythm. Each step had weight, purpose. His dark shirt, slightly open at the chest, revealed skin bronzed by the unforgiving western sun. His cowboy hat cast a shadow over his face, but didn't hide the sharp jawline. The light stubble of someone who'd traveled for days without rest, and those eyes, gray as steel, deep as ancient wells. Jack didn't look at anyone, but everyone looked at him. On the porch of the small white church just a few yards from the station, Mindy Harper was on her knees, scrubbing the wooden planks with a damp cloth. Her black dress, already faded by time and sun, covered her body simply, almost severely. Her brown hair was pulled back in a low bun, a few rebellious strands escaping and sticking to her damp neck. She'd been dressed in mourning for 3 years. 3 years since she'd buried her husband. 3 years invisible. But in that moment, when she raised her eyes and saw Jack stepping off the train, something inside her woke up. It was like an electric current ran down her spine. Her heart raced without warning. Her hands stopped mid-motion, the cloth dripping forgotten water onto the wood. She couldn't look away, couldn't breathe right. And then, it happened. Jack turned his head, slowly, as if he knew she was there, as if he felt her eyes on him. Their eyes met, and the world disappeared. There was no sound, no movement, just that look, long, penetrating, impossible to ignore. He saw her, really saw her, not like the others who passed by her as if she were part of the scenery, a quiet, harmless widow. No. Jack saw her as a woman, as someone who still breathed, felt burned inside. Mindy felt her belly contract. A warm wave rose through her body, igniting places she thought had gone dark. Her face flushed, her legs trembled. She swallowed hard, but her mouth was dry. Her heart pounded so hard she was afraid he might hear it even from there. Jack didn't smile, didn't wave. He just held that gaze for 3 more eternal seconds. Then he turned and headed toward the general store, carrying a single worn leather bag. Mindy let out the breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking. She looked around, desperate to see if anyone had noticed, but the street was empty. Just her and this stranger who'd just turned her world upside down. "Who is he?" she whispered to herself, her voice hoarse, almost unrecognizable. That night Mindy couldn't sleep. Lying in the narrow bed of the room she shared with loneliness, she relived that look. His eyes seemed to have touched her, not with hands, but with something deeper, more dangerous. Her skin prickled just remembering. Her whole body was awake, alive, hungry for something she didn't dare name. She turned on her side, pressing the pillow against her chest, as if she could suffocate that feeling. But it was useless. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, his firm posture, the way he'd looked at her, unhurried, unashamed, unafraid. "He's just a stranger," she murmured into the darkness. "Tomorrow I won't even see him." But it was a lie, and she knew it. The next morning Mindy woke before sunrise. She dressed hurriedly, pinned her hair more carefully than usual and went down to the kitchen. Her brother, Pastor Elias Harper, was already sitting at the table, leafing through the Bible with a serene expression. "Good morning, Mindy," he said without looking up. "Good morning," she replied, her voice low. She prepared coffee in silence, but her hands trembled as she held the kettle. Elias was a good man, but rigid. He'd taken her in when she became a widow, but he also kept her under a watchful eye. To him, Mindy's life should be one of seclusion, prayer and service, nothing more. "I heard a stranger arrived yesterday," Elias commented, turning the page of the holy book. Mindy's heart jumped. She feigned disinterest. "Oh, really? A cowboy? They say he came from Texas. Big, quiet, hard look about him." Elias paused. "I don't like strangers around here. They bring trouble." Mindy didn't respond. But inside something rebelled. He didn't bring trouble. He brought life. It was mid-morning while Mindy was sweeping the church entrance that she saw him again. Jack was crossing the street, coming from the general store. He carried a sack of provisions on his shoulder, as if it weighed nothing. The sun hit him from the side, illuminating his strong profile, his beard now trimmed, his eyes still hidden by the brim of his hat. Mindy stopped sweeping. Her heart raced again. He was going to walk right past. But then, like the day before, he turned his head and looked at her. This time it was worse. Or better. Mindy didn't know anymore. Jack slowed his pace. He didn't stop, but slowed enough for the look to linger. His eyes traveled over her face, down her neck, back to her eyes. It wasn't invasive, it was recognition, as if he were memorizing every detail. Mindy felt her cheeks burn. She wanted to look away, but couldn't. It was as if she were trapped, bewitched. Then, for the first time, he spoke. "Morning, ma'am." His voice was deep, rough, loaded with something she couldn't define. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She just nodded slightly, her fingers gripping the broom handle so tightly her knuckles turned white. Jack gave a small smile, almost imperceptible, and walked on. Mindy stood there, paralyzed, her whole body trembling, her heart wild in her chest. And she knew in that instant that she was in danger. Not the kind of danger Elias feared, but the kind of danger she wanted. Mindy spent the rest of that Sunday as if she were floating. It wasn't happiness. It was something more unsettling, more alive. A restlessness that made her feel her own skin, her own blood running through her veins. Every movement seemed more conscious, every breath deeper. It was as if, after 3 years asleep, someone had lit a flame inside her. And that flame had a name, had a rough voice, had steel-grey eyes. During the afternoon sermon, Mindy sat in her usual pew in the second row, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on her brother, who preached fervently about resisting the temptations of the world. But she didn't hear a single word. Her mind was far away, trapped in that "Morning, ma'am," whispered in a voice that seemed made to say forbidden things. "Mindy!" She blinked, coming back to reality. Her brother was looking at her from the front of the church, his eyebrows furrowed. "Sorry, Elias," she murmured, lowering her eyes. A few people turned to look at her. She felt the heat rise up her neck. "Pay attention," he said firmly, before resuming the sermon. But it was impossible, because at that exact moment the church door opened and Jack walked in. The air changed instantly. Mindy felt it before she even saw him, a magnetic presence, heavy, impossible to ignore. He stopped in the doorway, slowly removing his hat, his eyes scanning the interior of the small church until they found hers. The world stopped again. Mindy forgot to breathe. Her heart pounded so hard, she was sure everyone could hear it. Jack looked at her for a second too long to be casual, and then walked to the back pew, sitting down with the straight posture of someone used to not asking permission. Elias hesitated mid-sentence, but soon resumed the sermon, though now with a more severe tone, as if wanting to mark his territory. Mindy couldn't look forward anymore. Every fiber of her body was aware that Jack was there, behind her, so close and yet so far. She could feel his gaze burning into her back, penetrating the black fabric of her dress, touching her skin without permission. When the sermon ended, people began to leave. Mindy stood up too quickly, her legs wobbly. She needed to get out of there, needed air. But when she turned toward the aisle, she bumped into someone. Jack. He was there, standing, blocking the passage without even trying, just existing, too big to be ignored. "Excuse me," Mindy whispered, her voice failing. He didn't move immediately. He just looked down at her, his eyes traveling over her face with a slowness that made the temperature rise. "Sorry," he finally said, taking a step to the side. But when she passed, their bodies nearly touched. Nearly. His heat was palpable. The smell of leather, simple soap, and something indefinable, masculine, wild, invaded her senses. Mindy stumbled slightly, and Jack's large hand reached out, gripping her elbow firmly. "Careful," he murmured, so close she felt the warmth of his breath graze her ear. Mindy gasped softly. His hand was warm, firm, strong. His fingers wrapped around her arm with a gentleness that contrasted with the size of those hands. For an instant, just one, she allowed herself to feel the touch, feel the protection, feel that she was alive. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice trembling. Jack released her slowly, his fingers lingering longer than necessary. Then he took a step back, put his hat back on, and left the church without looking at anyone else. Mindy stood there, her arm still tingling where he'd touched her, her heart galloping out of control. "Mindy!" Elias's voice pulled her from the trance. He was at the entrance, looking at her with suspicion. "Who was that man?" "I don't know," she lied, her voice steadier than she expected. "Just a stranger." Elias narrowed his eyes, but said nothing more. That night, Mindy tried to keep busy. She washed the dishes more vigorously than necessary, swept the floor twice, folded the clean clothes with obsessive precision, but nothing worked. Her mind always returned to the same place. His touch, his voice, his smell. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling. She looked at her own reflection in the small, cracked mirror on the dresser. When was the last time someone had touched her? When was the last time she'd felt seen? 3 years. 3 years of loneliness. 3 years of mourning. 3 years of waiting for a life that would never come. And then Jack appeared. And with a single look, with a single touch, he shattered all the walls she'd built around herself. Mindy brought her hand to her arm, to the exact spot where he'd held her. She could still feel it, could still imagine it. And for the first time in 3 years, she wanted more. On Monday, Mindy woke with a strange feeling in her chest, something between fear and anticipation. She knew it was wrong, knew it was dangerous, but she couldn't stop thinking about him. She went to the general store to get flour and sugar, her heart racing with each step. Part of her hoped to see him there, another part prayed he wouldn't be. But he was. Jack was leaning against the counter, talking to the store owner, Mr. Gunderson, a short, pot-bellied man who talked too much. When Mindy entered, Jack stopped mid-sentence and turned his head. Their eyes met again, and again the world around them disappeared. Mindy felt her legs weaken. She gripped her purse strap tightly, trying to maintain her composure. She walked to the counter, feigning normalcy, but each step felt like an eternity. "Good morning, Miss Harper," Mr. Gunderson greeted with a smile. "What can I get you today?" "Flour and sugar, please," she replied, her voice coming out lower than she intended. Jack said nothing, but he didn't need to. His body was turned toward her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from those broad shoulders. He watched her in silence, unhurried, unashamed. Mr. Gunderson went to get the items from the back storage, leaving them alone for a few seconds. The silence was deafening. Mindy glanced at Jack. He was in profile, his jaw defined, his beard trimmed, his eyes fixed on her. It wasn't a casual look. It was intentional, provocative, as if he knew exactly the effect he had on her. "Do you come here often?" His voice broke the silence like soft thunder. Mindy swallowed hard. "Every Saturday." "Good to know." He said it simply, but the tone, deep, low, loaded, made her stomach knot. Before she could respond, Mr. Gunderson returned with the packages. Jack picked up his hat from the counter, gave a slight nod to them both, and left the store. But before crossing the threshold, he looked back, right at her, and smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It was discreet, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. Mindy left the store minutes later with her purchases in hand and trembling legs. When she got home, the sugar package slipped from her fingers and fell on the kitchen floor, scattering white grains everywhere. She fell to her knees trying to collect it all, but her hands were shaking so badly it was useless. And then, alone in the silent kitchen, Mindy pressed her forehead to the cold floor and let out a long sigh, heavy with desire and desperation. What's happening to me? But deep down, she knew. It wasn't fear. It was hunger. Hunger to be touched. Hunger to be seen. Hunger to live. And Jack knew it. She saw it in his eyes. He knew exactly what he was doing to her. And she was letting it happen. Saturdays in Silver Creek had always been the same. Predictable, calm, monotonous. But since Jack Monroe's arrival, Saturdays had taken on new meaning for Mindy. Now every Saturday was an unspoken promise, a silent expectation that made her wake with her heart racing and her hands sweating. Because she knew, just as he went to the general store every week, she also went to the church, and the path between the two places crossed. Always. It wasn't coincidence. Not anymore. 3 weeks had passed since that first encounter. 3 Saturdays of lingering looks, slow steps, bodies that almost touched but never completely did. It was a dangerous dance, silent, charged with a tension that grew each day. Mindy began to dress more carefully. Not obviously. It would be unthinkable for the pastor's sister to appear vain, but she let a few strands of hair fall around her face, pinched her cheeks to give them color, adjusted her dress belt to emphasize her waist, small gestures, details she hadn't bothered with in the last 3 years. And Jack noticed. She knew he noticed. She saw it in his eyes, that subtle gleam, the way his gaze traveled over her face, down her neck, back to her lips. He didn't hide it, and it drove her crazy. That Saturday in May, the air was hotter than usual. The sun beat down hard on Silver Creek, and golden dust rose from the dirt streets whenever a wagon passed. Mindy was on the church porch, watering the flowers planted in wooden boxes. Her black dress stuck to her body from the heat, and she felt a drop of sweat roll down her neck. That's when she heard the footsteps, heavy, firm, unmistakable. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Her whole body recognized him before her eyes confirmed it. Her heart raced, her hands trembled, and the watering can nearly slipped from her fingers. Jack was crossing the street, coming from the general store, as always. But this time, he wasn't carrying anything. His hands were free, swinging slightly at his sides as he walked with that confident, almost lazy posture. Mindy pretended to concentrate on the flowers, but every cell in her body was aware of his approach. She heard the footsteps getting closer, felt the air change, and then he stopped, right in front of the church, right in front of her. Mindy raised her eyes slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. Jack was there, standing just a few yards away, his hat casting a shadow over his face, but not enough to hide those grey eyes that seemed to see right through her. "It's hot today," he said, his deep voice breaking the silence like distant thunder. Mindy swallowed hard. "It is. You should rest a bit. This sun doesn't forgive." She should thank him and go back to work, should walk away, should remember who she was and where she stood. But instead, she heard her own voice say, "What about you? Aren't you afraid of the sun?" His lips curved slightly, almost a smile, but not quite. "I've seen worse things than the sun." There was something in that tone, something dark, loaded with history. Mindy wanted to ask, wanted to know where he came from, what he'd seen, why he'd chosen Silver Creek. But she didn't dare. Jack took a step forward, just one, but it was enough for the distance between them to decrease considerably. Now he was close. Too close. She could see the details of his face, the small scar on his left eyebrow, the strong line of his jaw, the way his beard grew unevenly in some spots. She could smell him. Leather, clean sweat, something woody. "May I?" He pointed to the watering can she was holding. Mindy blinked, confused. "What?" "Let me help. You look tired." She should refuse, should say she could manage alone. But instead she extended the watering can to him. Their fingers touched in the transfer. It was quick, it was light, but it was like an electric shock. Mindy felt the heat rise up her arm, spread through her chest, down to her belly. She held her breath, her eyes fixed on his large hands that now held the watering can as if it were a teacup. Jack began to water the flowers, slowly, with an unexpected delicacy for someone his size. Mindy stood there, motionless, watching, unable to move, unable to think of anything besides his closeness, the heat radiating from his body, the way the muscles in his arm contracted with each movement. "You take good care of them," he said, without taking his eyes off the flowers. "I try," she murmured, her voice coming out hoarse. "It's beautiful, seeing someone care for something small with so much tenderness." There was something in those words, something that wasn't about flowers. Mindy felt her stomach tighten. He was talking about her. She knew it. Jack finished watering the last flowers and returned the can to her. This time he held it longer. His fingers brushed hers, lingered, lightly caressed the side of her hand, before letting go. Mindy gasped softly. Her knees nearly gave out. "Thank you," she whispered, not knowing exactly what for. Jack tilted his head slightly, put his hat back on, and took a step back. But before leaving, he looked into her eyes, long, intense, as if he were saying something words couldn't express. And then he left. Mindy stood there trembling, the watering can slipping from her fingers and falling to the ground with a dull thud. Water spread across the wood, soaking her boots, but she didn't even notice. She could only stare at the empty street where he'd disappeared. What's happening to me? That night, Elias was more serious than usual during dinner. He cut the bread with abrupt movements, his jaw tense. "That man, the stranger," he began, without looking at Mindy. "He's been showing up around here a lot." Her heart jumped. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, Mindy." Now he looked, and there was something hard in that look. "I saw you two talking today. In front of the church." Mindy felt her blood run cold. "He was just being polite, offered to help. Men like him don't do anything out of politeness." Elias dropped his knife on the plate forcefully. "He's dangerous. I can see it in his eyes. I've seen men like him before. You don't know him." "And you do." Elias's voice rose, authoritative. "Mindy, you're a widow. You have a reputation to protect. You can't be seen talking to strangers, especially that kind of stranger." Mindy clenched her fists under the table. Anger began to rise, and slowly but steadily. "What kind, Elias? A man who works, who lives his life without bothering anyone. A man who looks at you as if—" Elias stopped, his cheeks flushed. "As if he has no respect." Mindy stood from her chair, her legs trembling with indignation. "Or maybe he looks at me like I'm still a person, and not just a shadow." She left the kitchen before Elias could respond, climbed the stairs, locked herself in her room and leaned against the door, her chest rising and falling rapidly. For the first time in 3 years, she felt anger. Anger at Elias, anger at the town, anger at herself for accepting this life of silence and invisibility. And for the first time, she wanted something just for herself, something forbidden, something dangerous, something with steel-grey eyes and a voice like thunder. Sunday dawned grey, with heavy clouds covering Silver Creek's sky. The air was thick, dense, as if a storm were coming. But it wasn't just the weather that left Mindy restless. It was something deeper, more urgent, a feeling that something was about to happen. She woke early, even before the sun tried to break through the clouds. She dressed in silence, pinned her hair with less care than usual, and went down to the kitchen. Elias was still asleep. The house was plunged in a heavy silence, almost suffocating. Mindy made coffee but couldn't drink it. Her stomach was churning, tight. She looked out the kitchen window, watching the backyard where the well stood and the small pen that housed their 2 chickens and the old horse Elias used to visit parishioners. And then she heard it. Footsteps. Coming from the side of the house. Her heart raced before she even saw who it was. She knew. Her whole body recognized that sound. Firm, measured, confident. Mindy set her cup on the sink and walked to the back door. She opened it slowly, her heart pounding so hard she felt the pulse in her throat. Jack was there, standing in the middle of the yard, holding the reins of a black, imposing horse. He wore a long-sleeved shirt, partially open at the chest, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing muscular forearms marked by old scars. His hat was tilted slightly back, and for the first time, she saw his face completely illuminated by the diffused morning light. He was even more handsome than she'd imagined. "Morning," he said, his deep voice cutting through the dawn's silence. Mindy descended the 2 porch steps, her hands gripping her dress skirt. What are you doing here?" Jack looked at the horse, stroking the animal's neck with slow movements. "He was thirsty. I saw the well. Hope you don't mind." She should send him away, should say that Elias was home, that it wasn't appropriate, that people might see. But instead, she heard her own voice say, "Of course, I'll get water." She walked to the well, her steps trembling. She grabbed the wooden bucket hanging from the side and began pulling the rope. The water rose heavy, cold, sloshing inside the bucket. She held it with both hands and turned around. Jack was right behind her, so close she almost bumped into him, so close she felt the heat from his body before she even fully saw him. Mindy gasped, taking a step back. The bucket swayed, water nearly spilling over. "Careful," Jack murmured, extending his hands. He held the bucket with her, his large, calloused hands wrapped around hers, firm, warm, enveloping. His fingers brushed hers, not by accident, but with intention. Slowly, deliberately. Mindy felt the world spin. His touch was like fire, intense, consuming, impossible to ignore. She looked down at their hands, intertwined on the bucket, and felt something contract deep in her belly. A wave of heat rose through her body, igniting every nerve ending, every piece of skin. I can manage," she whispered, but her voice came out weak, trembling. "I know you can." His voice was even lower, rougher, loaded with something that made her heart race. "But I wanted to help anyway." He didn't let go. They stood there, their hands intertwined on the bucket, their eyes finally meeting. And Mindy saw the desire, saw the intention, saw everything he wasn't saying but that screamed in that deep gray gaze. Jack took a step forward. Now they were so close she could feel his breath brushing her face, could see the details, the small lines around his eyes, the way his lips were slightly parted, the beard she wanted to touch, feel the rough texture against her palm. "You're trembling," he murmured, his eyes dropping to her lips. "I'm cold," she lied. "You're not." He smiled, a small smile, almost imperceptible but loaded with certainty. "You're feeling the same thing I am." Mindy couldn't respond. Her throat was closed, air trapped in her lungs. She knew she should step away, but her feet wouldn't obey. Her whole body was paralyzed, trapped in that moment, in that look, in that touch that burned like embers. Jack released the bucket slowly, but his hands didn't leave hers. His fingers traveled over the backs of her hands, up her wrists, lightly brushed her forearms. It was a light touch, almost innocent, but the effect was devastating. Mindy closed her eyes, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She felt his thumb caress the racing pulse at her wrist. He knew exactly what he was doing to her. "You're so small," he whispered, his voice so low it was almost a whisper in the wind. "And yet, you fit perfectly." Her eyes opened, wide, shocked, but not frightened. Jack was looking at her with an intensity that made her legs weaken. There was no shame in that look, no hesitation, just promise. Mindy tried to speak, but the words died in her throat. "You don't need to say anything," Jack murmured, leaning in slightly. His lips were so close now she could feel the warmth, the smell of coffee, and something woody that made her dizzy. "But one day, you'll want to. And when you do, I'll be here." He released her hands slowly, as if saying goodbye to something precious. He took the bucket, carried it to the horse, and let the animal drink in silence. Mindy stood there, motionless, her hands still tingling where he'd touched her, her whole body vibrating with an energy she didn't know existed. Jack finished, returned the bucket to its place, and mounted the horse with a fluid movement. Before leaving, he looked at her one more time. "Thanks for the water, Mindy." She gasped, hearing her own name from his mouth. It was the first time he'd said it, and the way it came out, deep, slow, like a caress, made something break inside her. He rode away, and she stood there, alone in the yard, the cold morning wind brushing her heated skin, her heart wild in her chest. She climbed the porch steps on shaky legs and entered the kitchen. She leaned against the door, closed her eyes, and brought her hand to her chest, trying to calm the heart that beat erratically. But it was useless, because now she knew what it was to be touched with intention, knew what it was to be looked at with desire, knew what it was to feel her whole body wake up, scream, beg for more, and she wanted more. God, how she wanted it. During the day, Mindy tried to distract herself. She cleaned the house, prepared lunch, helped Elias organize the hymnals for the evening service, but each task was done on autopilot. Her mind was far away, trapped in that yard, in that touch, in those words that echoed endlessly in her head. You're so small, and yet you fit perfectly. What did he mean? Was it just about her size compared to his, or was it something else? Mindy felt the heat rise up her neck just thinking about it. She knew. Deep down, she knew exactly what he meant, and it drove her crazy with desire and fear at the same time. That night, lying in bed, she stared at the dark ceiling and let her imagination run wild. She imagined his hands, large, calloused, warm, touching not just hers, but traveling up her arms, her shoulders, her neck. She imagined his lips, firm, determined, pressing against hers. She imagined his body, broad, strong, protective, enveloping hers completely. And for the first time in 3 years, Mindy touched her own skin. She ran her fingers along her neck, down her collarbone, felt her heart beating hard under her palm. She closed her eyes and imagined they were his hands, that it was his touch, that it was he who made her feel alive again. A tear rolled down the corner of her eye, not from sadness, from frustration, because she wanted it so badly it hurt, but she couldn't. Or could she? The following days were silent torture. Mindy walked through the house like a ghost, completing her tasks mechanically, while her mind remained trapped in that yard, in that touch, in those words that echoed endlessly. Elias noticed the change. She saw it in the suspicious looks he cast during meals, in the way he watched her when he thought she didn't notice, but he said nothing. And she was grateful for that, because she wouldn't know what to say. How could she explain that something inside her had awakened? How could she confess that every night was a battle against her own body, against desires that grew like uncontrollable fire? How could she admit that she waited for, longed for, another encounter with the man Elias considered dangerous? On Wednesday, the sky finally broke open. The storm that had been building for days arrived with force, bringing heavy rain, thunder that shook the windows, and lightning that illuminated the house in white, ghostly flashes. Elias had left at dusk to visit a family at the Morrison farm on the other side of town. He said he'd return late, maybe not until the next day if the rain worsened. Mindy was left alone in the large, empty house, the sound of the storm filling every room. She was in the kitchen, trying to reach the coffee tin in the high cabinet, when she heard the back door open. Her heart stopped. She turned slowly, her whole body tense, and saw Jack standing in the doorway, dripping rainwater, his hat in his hands, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. He was soaked, his shirt clinging to his body, revealing the muscles of his chest and shoulders, his dark pants heavy with water. "Sorry for coming in like this," he said, his voice muffled by the sound of rain outside. "I saw the light. I thought you might need help." Mindy opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She just stood there, on the kitchen stool she'd climbed to reach the cabinet, her fingers still stretched upward, her dress slightly raised up her legs because of her position. Jack entered slowly, closing the door behind him. Water dripped from him, forming small puddles on the floor. He didn't take his eyes off her, not for a second. You're wet," Mindy managed to say, her voice coming out trembling. "I am." He took another step forward. "And you're standing on a stool, in the dark, alone." "I was getting coffee. It's too high for you." "I can manage." "I know you can." Jack stopped right beside the stool, looking up at her. Now they were at the same height, her eyes finally level with his. "But I'm going to help anyway." Before she could protest, he placed his hands on her waist. Mindy gasped, loud, audible. His hands were large, warm even through the damp fabric of her dress. His fingers wrapped completely around her waist, firm, possessive, and she felt the heat spread like a devastating wave through her entire body. "I'm going to lift you down," he murmured, his voice low, rough. Slowly, he began to lift her, taking her off the stool with alarming ease, as if she weighed nothing. But instead of placing her directly on the floor, he lowered her slowly, very slowly. Her body slid against his, inch by inch, the front of her brushing against his chest, his shoulders, his abdomen. She felt everything, the firmness of his muscles, the heat of his skin through the wet clothes, the controlled strength in those hands that held her as if she were something precious and fragile. When her feet finally touched the floor, Jack didn't let go. They stood there, pressed together, his hands still on her waist, his chest rising and falling against hers. Their breaths mingled, hot, heavy. Mindy raised her eyes slowly, her heart pounding so hard she thought she might faint, and met his gaze, intense, hungry, determined. "You trembled," he whispered, his thumb caressing the side of her waist through the fabric. "When I touched you, you trembled. She swallowed hard. "I didn't. Don't lie." His voice was even lower, almost a growl. "Not to me." His hands moved up. Slowly, they traveled over her waist, her ribs, stopped just below where she felt the most heat and desire. He didn't advance, just held there, his thumbs caressing lightly up and down, a hypnotic rhythm that was driving her crazy. "Jack." She whispered his name for the first time, and it sounded like a prayer, like a plea, like a surrender. He closed his eyes for a second, as if hearing his name from her mouth was too physical. When he opened them again, there was something wild in that look. "Say it again." "What?" "My name." "Say it again." "Jack." This time it came out firmer, more intentional. He made a low sound in his throat, something between a moan and a sigh. His hands tightened slightly on her waist, pulling her a millimeter closer. "You have no idea," he murmured, tilting his head, his lips so close to her ear, she felt the warmth of his breath. "What you do to me." Mindy closed her eyes, her legs weakening. If it weren't for his hands holding her, she would have fallen. She tried to form words, but her brain had shut down. Only her body was working, and it was screaming, begging, demanding. Jack raised one hand slowly and brought it to her face. His thumb brushed her cheek, descended along her jawline, stopped at her chin. He tilted her face up, forcing her to look directly into his eyes. "If you want me to leave," he said, his voice tense, controlled, "say it now. Because if I stay one more second here, like this, so close to you, I won't be able to stop." Mindy parted her lips, her breath coming in small gasps. She knew what she should do, knew what was right, knew what Elias would say, what the town would say, what God would say. But for the first time in 3 years, she didn't care. "Stay," she whispered. It was all he needed to hear. Jack pulled her hair back with a gentle movement, his fingers sliding through the loose strands, caressing her neck. He leaned in, and Mindy felt the entire world stop. His lips brushed her forehead, slowly. A light kiss, almost reverent, then descended. Her temple, her cheekbone, the corner of her mouth, but he didn't kiss her, not yet. He stayed there, his lips millimeters from hers, hot breath mingling, mouths almost touching. It was torture. It was ecstasy. It was everything. "Ah, you're so small," he murmured again, his voice rough with desire. "And I'm too big. But I swear." He pressed his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. "I swear I'll fit. Perfectly." Mindy understood. Finally understood everything he'd been saying, everything he'd been promising. And her body responded, a deep contraction, a liquid heat, a need so intense she almost cried out. "Jack!" She gripped his arms, her nails digging lightly into the wet fabric of his shirt. "Please," he smiled, a slow, sensual, devastating smile. "Please what, Mindy? Say it. I need to hear you say it." She opened her eyes, met his, and for the first time in years was completely honest. "Kiss me." And he obeyed. His lips touched hers with unexpected softness. It wasn't rough, wasn't desperate. It was deliberate, controlled, as if Jack were savoring every second, every sensation, every sigh that escaped her mouth. Mindy felt the entire world collapse and rebuild at the same time. Her knees gave out, but his arms held her firm, pulling her even closer against his body. She felt his broad chest pressing against hers, felt the heat penetrating through the damp clothes, felt his heart pounding as hard as hers. The kiss deepened, slowly. His lips moved against hers with a mastery that made her moan softly. He responded with a rough sound in his throat, his hands moving up her back, one stopping at her nape, fingers intertwining in the loose strands of hair, the other descending along the curve of her spine, stopping at the small of her back, pressing her against him. Mindy had never been kissed like this, had never been touched like this. It was as if every movement of his was a promise, every touch a silent declaration of intentions that went far beyond that moment. When he finally pulled away, both were breathless. Mindy opened her eyes slowly, still dizzy, still trembling, and met his gaze. Dark, intense, hungry. "God," Jack murmured, his voice rough, tight. "You have no idea how long I've waited for this." "How long?" she whispered, still leaning against him, still holding his arms as if they were the only solid thing in a spinning world. "Since the first moment I saw you." He brought his hand to her face, his thumb caressing her lower lip, swollen from the kiss. "On the church porch, in that black dress, that look, scared and curious at the same time. I knew in that instant." "Knew what?" "That you were going to be my ruin." He smiled, a small smile but loaded with truth. "Or my salvation. I haven't decided yet." Mindy felt her chest tighten. There was something so raw, so honest in those words that she wanted to cry and laugh at the same time. "I'm not any of that," she murmured. "I'm just—" "No." He cut her off, his voice firm. "You're not just anything. You're everything, and I'm going to prove that to you." Before she could respond, he kissed her again, this time with more urgency, more hunger. His hands descended over her waist, her hips stopping at her thighs. He lifted her effortlessly, and Mindy instinctively wrapped her legs around his waist. Her heart exploded. The feeling of being in his arms, suspended, completely enveloped by the strength and heat of this man, was overwhelming. She felt his body, firm, warm, present, pressed against hers in a way that made something contract deep in her belly. Jack walked with her in his arms, crossing the kitchen, and gently pressed her against the wall. Her back touched the cold wood, but his body in front was pure fire. He pulled his lips away for a second, just to look at her. His eyes traveled over her face, her swollen lips, flushed cheeks, eyes bright with desire and fear mixed together. "If you want to stop," he said, his voice tense, controlled, "just say it. I'll stop. Now. Always." Mindy looked at him. This enormous, strong, dangerous man who held her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. And she knew she could trust him, knew he would never hurt her. "Don't stop," she whispered. Jack closed his eyes, releasing a long, trembling sigh. When he opened them again, there was something different there, something deeper, more real. "You're so small," he murmured, his mouth brushing her ear, his voice low, warm, loaded with dark promises. "So delicate. And I'm too big, too broad, too strong." His hand squeezed her thighs lightly as if wanting to prove the point. "But you know what I discovered?" He tilted his head, his lips brushing her neck, descending along the line of her throat, stopping at the curve of her shoulder. "You'll take me completely, perfectly." Mindy gasped, her whole body vibrating with those words. She knew what he was saying, knew exactly what he was promising, and God, how she wanted it. "Jack," she held his face, forcing him to look into her eyes. I don't know if... You know." He kissed her palm, then her wrist, feeling the accelerated pulse under his lips. "Your body knows. I feel it. I see it." He lowered his mouth to her neck again, kissing, nibbling lightly, sucking gently. Mindy threw her head back, eyes closed, mouth open in small sighs she couldn't control. His hands began to explore, moving up her ribs, along her sides, stopping just below the places that asked, begged, for attention. But he didn't advance, just caressed with torturous patience, as if wanting to memorize every curve, every reaction, every sound that escaped her mouth. "You're perfect," he murmured against her skin. "Small, soft, warm, and you're going to be mine." "I already am," she whispered, surprised by her own courage. Jack stopped, raised his head, looking at her with an intensity that made the air disappear from her lungs. "Say it again." "I'm already yours." Something broke in him. She saw it, saw the control unraveling, saw desire taking over, saw the man yielding to instinct. He kissed her with devastating hunger, his hands finally moving up, touching, caressing, exploring. Mindy moaned against his mouth, her body arching, asking for more, always more. Jack took her from the wall and walked with her to the kitchen table. He sat her on the edge, standing between her legs, his hands firm on her hips, keeping her in place. "Look at me," he ordered, his voice rough. She obeyed. Her eyes met his, wild, dark, consumed. "I'm going to touch you," he said, each word heavy, loaded. "I'm going to kiss you. I'm going to feel you, and you're going to let me. Because you want it, because you need it, because you deserve it." Mindy couldn't respond, just nodded, her chest rising and falling rapidly, her whole body trembling with anticipation. And Jack kept his promise. His hands traveled over her body with a reverence that made her want to cry. He touched every forgotten place, every part of her that hadn't been seen in years, and with each touch, she felt something inside her rebuild. It wasn't just desire. It was rebirth. His lips followed the path of his hands, kissing, tasting, worshipping. Mindy lost herself completely, forgot where she was, forgot who she was. Only that moment existed, that man, that fire that consumed her entirely. "Jack!" She pulled his face up, looking into his eyes with raw vulnerability. "I need you. I know." He pressed his forehead to hers, eyes closed, breathing heavy. "God, I know. But not here. Not like this. Why? Because you deserve more." He opened his eyes and there was so much tenderness there that her heart ached. "You deserve to be touched in a bed, with time, with care, with everything I have to give you." Tears welled in her eyes. No one ever treated me like this." "Then they were fools." He wiped the tears with his thumbs, kissing each of her eyes. "And I'm going to spend all the time you give me proving that you're worth everything." Mindy pulled him into a kiss, slow, deep, full of silent promises. And in that dark kitchen, with the storm roaring outside, two forgotten souls finally found each other. Jack didn't come back that night. He left before the storm calmed, before anyone could see him leaving the pastor's house. But he left something behind, an invisible mark on Mindy's skin, a living memory in every place he touched, every word he whispered, every promise he made. Mindy barely slept. She lay in the narrow bed, staring at the dark ceiling, reliving every second. The touch of his hands, the heat of his body, the way he'd looked at her, as if she were the only woman in the world, as if she mattered. When the sun rose, she was exhausted, but strangely alive. Every muscle ached in a good way. Her skin tingled, her heart beat in a different rhythm, faster, stronger, more present. Elias returned at noon, complaining about the muddy road and the cold he'd caught at the Morrison farm. Mindy prepared hot tea and soup but avoided his gaze. She was afraid he might see that she had changed, see that she was no longer the obedient, invisible widow, see that she had been touched, desired, awakened. The following days were a torture of anticipation. Mindy waited to see him. With every sound of footsteps in the street, her heart raced. With every shadow that passed by the window, she held her breath. But Jack didn't appear. Had he regretted it? Had he realized she wasn't worth it? Had it been just a moment, an impulse, something he'd already forgotten? But then, on Thursday afternoon, he appeared. Mindy was in the backyard, hanging clothes on the line. The sun beat down hard, and she'd taken off her black shawl, leaving her arms bare for the first time in months. She felt strangely bold, free. She heard the footsteps before she saw him. That unmistakable sound, firm, measured, confident. She turned, her heart already racing, and there he was. Jack stopped at the back gate, his hat in his hands, his eyes fixed on her. He said nothing, just looked. And that look said everything. I thought about you, every second, every breath. Mindy dropped the sheet she was holding, her hands trembling. She took a step forward, then another, and another, until she was standing right in front of him, so close she could feel his heat, the smell of leather and sun. "You disappeared," she said, her voice coming out lower than intended. "I had to." His voice was rough, tense. "If I'd come back sooner, I wouldn't have been able to control myself. And now you can?" Jack smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. "No." He extended his hand, slowly, giving her time to pull back. But she didn't pull back, just looked at the large, calloused hand extended like an invitation, and accepted, his fingers wrapped around hers with a firmness that made her close her eyes. It was just holding hands, but it felt like much more. It felt like choice. It felt like surrender. "Come with me," he whispered. "Where?" "Just a little farther, where no one can see us." She should refuse, should think about the consequences. But instead, she let him guide her. They crossed the yard, passed through the small woods behind the property, and reached a hidden clearing where an enormous tree stretched its branches like a green umbrella. Jack pulled her gently until they were under the shade. Then he released her hand and looked at her, really looked, as if seeing something precious that could disappear at any moment. "I brought something for you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Mindy took it with trembling hands and opened it slowly. Inside was a simple wooden comb, hand-carved with delicate flower designs. "I made it," he said, almost shy. "At night, when I couldn't sleep because I could only think about you." Tears welled before she could stop them. No one had ever made anything for her. No one had ever thought of her that way. "It's beautiful," she whispered, running her fingers over the delicate carvings. "Not as beautiful as you." Mindy raised her eyes, and what she saw on his face completely disarmed her. It wasn't just desire, it was devotion. "Jack." She took a step forward, placing her hand on his chest. She felt his heart beating hard, fast, wild. "What are you doing to me?" "The same thing you're doing to me." He covered her hand with his. "Driving me crazy, making me want things I never wanted before, making me believe I can be more than I've always been." "And what have you always been?" He looked away for a moment, his jaw tense. "A man without roots, without a place, without a future, just past and empty roads." "And now?" Jack looked back at her, and there was something different there. Something vulnerable. "Now I want to stay. For the first time in my life, I want to stay." Mindy felt her chest tighten. "Why?" "Because you see me." He brought his hand to her face, caressing her cheek with his thumb. "Not the cowboy, not the stranger, not the man people cross the street to avoid. You see me, really, because you let me see. And you let me touch." His voice became lower, rougher. "And God, Mindy, I need to touch you. Always. Now. Tomorrow. Every day for the rest of my life if you'll let me." Before she could respond, he pulled her into a kiss, different from the others. It wasn't just desire, it was promise, it was commitment. Mindy surrendered completely, her arms rising over his broad shoulders, her fingers intertwining in his dark hair. He moaned against her mouth, his hands descending over her waist, her hips pulling her against him with an urgency that made her dizzy. "I need you," he murmured against her lips, his breathing heavy. "Need to feel you, all of you, without barriers, without fear." "I need you too," she confessed, her voice trembling but firm. Jack pulled back enough to look into her eyes. "Not here, not hidden. You deserve better. I only deserve you." He closed his eyes, as if those words were too physical. When he opened them again, there was iron determination there. "Then it'll be the right way. You'll come to me, to my house, to my bed, and I'll show you exactly how a woman should be treated." "When?" "Saturday." He held her face between his large hands. "On Saturday, you come to me, and I promise I'll take care of you. In every way." Mindy nodded, unable to form words. The reality of what she was about to do hit her like a wave, but instead of fear, she felt relief. Finally, finally she was going to live. That night, after a silent dinner with Elias, Mindy locked herself in her room and looked at the comb Jack had made. She ran her fingers over the delicate carvings, imagining his hands working at night, thinking of her. For the first time in 3 years, she truly looked at herself in the mirror. Didn't just glance. Looked. Saw the woman there, thin, pale, marked by mourning. But she also saw something new. A brightness in her eyes, a flush in her cheeks, life slowly returning. She released her hair from the tight bun and let the strands fall over her shoulders. She ran the new comb through the strands, feeling each movement like a caress, and for the first time she allowed herself to imagined Jack touching that hair, imagined his fingers intertwining in the strands, imagined his rough voice whispering her name in the dark, imagined surrendering completely. And she didn't feel shame. She felt desire. Saturday. Only 2 days away. 2 days to cross the line that separated the woman she was from the woman she wanted to be. 2 days to choose life instead of death. 2 days to belong to someone who truly saw her. And God, she couldn't wait. Saturday arrived wrapped in dark clouds and wind that whispered promises of another storm. Mindy woke before dawn, her whole body vibrating with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Today would be the day. Elias left early for a meeting with the church elders in the neighboring town. He said he'd return only Sunday afternoon. Mindy waved goodbye, feigning normalcy, but inside her heart beat like a war drum. She was alone. Finally, alone. She prepared a hot bath, something she rarely did. She let her body submerge in the warm water, eyes closed, trying to calm her nerves. But it was impossible. Every thought returned to Jack, to his hands, to his voice, to the promises he'd made. "You'll come to me, and I'll show you exactly how a woman should be treated." She stepped out of the tub trembling, not from cold, but from anticipation. She dressed carefully, a simple dress, dark blue, that she hadn't worn in years. She let her hair down, allowing the strands to fall loose over her shoulders for the first time since becoming a widow. She ran the comb Jack had made through it, feeling each movement like a preparation, a ritual. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. Her eyes were bright, her cheeks flushed, her lips parted in nervous breathing. She looked alive. Afternoon fell quickly, bringing with it the smell of rain and distant thunder. Mindy walked through the empty house, unable to focus on any task. Her hands trembled, her stomach was tight. Part of her wanted to run, another part wanted to fly. That's when she heard the knock on the back door. Her heart stopped, then exploded in a wild race. She ran to the kitchen, opened the door, and there he was. Jack, standing in the light rain that had begun to fall, his hat in his hands, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. "I came to get you," he said, his voice rough, loaded. Mindy couldn't speak, just nodded. Jack extended his hand. "Come with me." She looked at the large, strong hand extended like an invitation to another world. She hesitated for just a second, then placed her hand in his and crossed the threshold. Jack's house was on the outskirts of town, hidden among tall trees, far from curious eyes. It was small, simple, but had something welcoming about it. A stone fireplace, rustic wooden furniture, a large bed covered with a thick blanket. When they entered, the rain was already falling hard outside. Jack closed the door and turned to her. They stood still, just looking at each other, the sound of the storm filling the silence. "Are you sure?" Jack asked, taking a step forward. "Because if you're not, if there's any doubt, I'll take you back now. No judgment, no hard feelings." Mindy took a deep breath, gathering all the courage she had. "I'm sure." Something changed in his eyes. The restraint he'd been maintaining for weeks began to unravel. He took another step, then another, until he was so close she had to raise her face to look into his eyes. "I dreamed about this," he murmured, his hand slowly rising to touch her face. "Every night, you, here, with me." "Me too," she confessed, her voice trembling. Jack leaned in, capturing her lips in a kiss that was different from all the others. There was no rush, no desperation, there was devotion, as if he wanted to memorize every second, every sensation, every sound she made. His hands traveled over her body with a reverence that made her tremble. They descended down her arms, her waist, her hips. He pulled her against him, and she felt every inch of that enormous, strong, heated body pressed against hers. "You're trembling," he whispered against her lips. "I know." "Nervous?" "A little." He pulled back enough to look into her eyes. "I'll take care of you, I promise. If at any moment you want to stop—" "I won't want to stop," she cut in, surprising herself with the firmness of her voice. Jack smiled, that slow, sensual smile that left her breathless. "Then come with me." He guided her to the bedroom, lit a low lamp that cast golden shadows on the wooden walls. The rain beat hard against the window, thunder echoing in the distance. But inside that room there was only warmth, soft light, and silent promises. Jack stopped beside the bed and turned to her. His hands rose to her shoulders, slowly descending down her arms, intertwining his fingers with hers. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "So beautiful it hurts to look." Mindy felt tears well up. No one had ever said that to her. No one had ever made her feel this way. Desired, precious, seen. Jack began to undo the buttons of her dress, slowly, one by one, his large fingers working with unexpected delicacy. Each button that opened revealed more skin, and he kissed every inch discovered. Her neck, her collarbone, her shoulder, descending slowly, teasing, worshipping. Mindy closed her eyes, her breathing coming in small gasps. Her hands rose to his chest, feeling the tense muscles beneath his shirt. She began to unbutton it too, her fingers trembling but determined. When his shirt fell to the floor, she finally saw. His body, broad, marked by old scars, muscles defined by hard work, skin bronzed by the sun. It was intimidating. It was beautiful. It was his. "Can I touch?" she whispered. "You can do whatever you want with me," he replied, his voice so rough it was almost a growl. She placed her hands on his chest, feeling the heat, the muscles contracting under her touch. She traveled over his abdomen, his ribs, returned to the heart that beat wildly, and then boldly she moved up over his shoulders, pulling him down until their lips met again. The kiss was devastating. Jack moaned against her mouth, his large hands wrapping around her waist, pulling her against him with an urgency that made her lose her balance. He held her firmly, then lifted her effortlessly, laying her gently on the bed. He stood for a moment, just looking at her, hair spread on the pillow, dress partially open, eyes bright with desire and trust. "God, Mindy." He ran his hand over his face, trembling. "You have no idea what you do to me." "Then show me," she whispered, extending her arms to him. And he showed her. Jack lay beside her, his hands traveling over every inch of exposed skin, his mouth following the path of his hands. He touched, kissed, caressed with a patience that was driving her crazy. There was no rush, there was adoration. Mindy arched her body, her hands gripping his shoulders, her fingers digging into the warm skin. She felt everything, his weight, his heat, the way he fit perfectly against her as if they'd been made for each other. "Jack." She pulled his face up, looking into his eyes with raw vulnerability. "I need you. Now." He propped himself on his elbows, hovering over her, his large body enveloping hers completely. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely." Jack leaned in, capturing her lips in a deep kiss, while finally, they became one. Mindy gasped, her whole body contracting with the overwhelming sensation. He was right. Perfectly right. She was small, he was big, but they fit. Perfectly. "Breathe," he whispered against her ear, his voice tense with restraint. "Just breathe. I'll go slow." And he did. With infinite patience, with a gentleness that contrasted with his size, Jack guided her through that ancient dance. He moved slowly, feeling every reaction, adjusting every movement. Mindy lost herself completely. There was no more fear, no more doubt. There was only him, his touch, his voice whispering her name like a prayer. The way he looked at her, as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "You're perfect." he murmured, his lips brushing her forehead. So perfect. Made for me. And she believed. For the first time in her life, she believed she was desired, that she was loved, that she was enough. When they finally reached the peak together, it was as if the entire world exploded and rebuilt at the same time. Mindy cried out his name, her nails digging into his back, her whole body convulsing with an intensity that left her breathless. Jack held her tight, his body trembling, his face buried in her neck, whispering incoherent words of devotion and gratitude. They stayed like that for long minutes, heavy breathing calming, wild hearts returning to normal rhythm. Jack rolled to the side but didn't let her go. He pulled her into his arms, enveloping her completely with that large, protective body. "I knew it," he murmured against her hair, his voice rough with emotion. "Knew what? That you were going to ruin me." "In every way." He kissed her forehead, eyes closed. "And now I can't imagine living without you." Mindy nestled against his chest, listening to the heart beating, strong, steady. "Then don't." He laughed softly, a rare, precious sound. "I don't intend to." And there, wrapped in his arms while the storm raged outside, Mindy finally understood. This wasn't sin. It was redemption. The storm continued through the night, but inside that small, cozy room, there was only peace. Mindy lay on Jack's chest, her fingers tracing lazy lines over his warm skin, feeling the scars that marked that body like a map of a hard life. Jack stroked her hair with slow, rhythmic movements, as if wanting to memorize the texture of the strands between his fingers. The blanket wrapped around them, but it was the heat of their intertwined bodies that truly warmed them. "Talk to me," Mindy whispered, her voice hoarse and satisfied. "About you. About where you came from." She felt his body tense for a moment. His fingers stopped in her hair. Mindy raised her head, resting her chin on his chest, looking at that face marked by life. "You don't have to if you don't want to," she said gently. "But I want to know you, all of you, not just the man who touches me, but the man you are." Jack sighed deeply, his eyes fixed on the wooden ceiling. "It's not a pretty story. I don't need pretty. I need truth." He looked at her then, really looked, and something opened in that gaze, a vulnerability she'd never seen before. "I grew up in Texas," he began, his voice low, loaded with heavy memories, "on an isolated ranch. My father was a hard man, violent when he drank, and he drank a lot." Mindy felt her chest tighten but said nothing. She just placed her hand over his heart, letting him know she was there, that she was listening. "My mother died when I was 12. Childbirth. The baby didn't survive either." He swallowed hard. "After that, my father got worse. He took everything out on me. Every mistake, every frustration, every empty bottle." "Jack," Mindy whispered, tears welling up. "I ran away at 16. Took a horse, some food, and never went back." He paused, his jaw tense. "I spent years working on ranches, farms, wherever they'd take me. Never stayed long. Never put down roots. Because roots meant pain, meant loss." "And now?" Jack looked at her, and there was something different in his eyes, something softer, more hopeful. "Now I don't want to run anymore." He brought his hand to her face, his thumb caressing her cheek. "You made me want to stay. For the first time I look at a place and think, here I could have a home." The tears flowed freely now. "Jack, I know I'm a stranger. I know the whole town doesn't trust me. I know your brother hates me, and people will talk." He sat up, pulling her into his lap, holding her face between his large hands. "But I don't care. I only care about you, about this, about what we have." "Me too," she whispered, her hands rising to cover his. "I care too. More than I should. More than is safe." "Then run away with me." Mindy blinked, her heart jumping. "What?" "Run away with me," he repeated, his voice firm, determined. "We'll leave here. Go somewhere where nobody knows us, where you're not the pastor's widow, where I'm not the dangerous stranger, where we can just be us." "Jack, I can't just—" "Why not?" He held tighter. "What ties you here? Your brother who treats you like property? A town that forgot you were alive 3 years ago? A life of eternal mourning for a man who's gone?" The words were harsh, but true. Mindy felt something break inside her, but not in a painful way. It was liberating. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Me too." Jack pressed his forehead to hers. "I'm scared of losing you. Scared I won't be enough. Scared you'll wake up one day and realize you deserve better than a cowboy with no past and no future." "You are my future," she said firmly, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "From the moment you stepped off that train, you became my future." Jack closed his eyes, a trembling sigh escaping his lips. When he opened them again, they were moist. "Then stay with me. Forever. No matter what comes, no matter who tries to separate us, you and me. Against the world." Mindy pulled him into a kiss, deep, desperate, full of promises and fears and hopes mixed together. When they pulled apart, she looked into his eyes with iron determination. "Yes. Yes? Yes, I'll stay with you. Yes, I'll run away with you. Yes to everything." She held his face, forcing him to see the truth in her eyes. "Because for the first time in years I feel alive. And I'm not giving that up. I'm not giving you up." Jack pulled her forcefully, hugging her so tight she could barely breathe, but she didn't complain. Because there, wrapped in his arms, she finally felt at home. "We're going to need a plan," he murmured against her hair. "I know. Your brother won't let you go without a fight. I know that too. And the whole town will talk. They'll call you horrible things. Let them talk." She pulled back enough to look into his eyes. "I don't care any more what they think. I only care what I think. And I think you're the best thing that's ever happened to me." Jack smiled, that rare, genuine smile that lit up his entire face. "When?" "Sunday. After the service. Elias will be distracted with goodbyes. We meet at the station. And we leave." "Are you sure? Absolutely sure?" Mindy didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." They kissed again, sealing the promise. And then, as the storm finally calmed outside, they lay together again. Not to sleep, but to lose themselves in each other one more time, knowing that every touch, every kiss, every whisper was preparation for the life they were about to build together. When Mindy returned home Sunday morning, before dawn, she was a different woman. She walked differently, looked differently, felt differently. Elias was in the kitchen when she entered, drinking coffee. He raised his eyes, and she saw immediate suspicion. "Where were you?" His voice was cold, controlled. "I went for a walk. I needed to think." "All night?" "I slept in the barn. It was warm." Elias studied her for a long moment. She held his gaze without wavering, without lowering her eyes, as she always did. "You've changed," he said finally. "I have. Because of him." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Mindy took a deep breath, gathering courage. "Yes, because of him." Elias slammed his cup on the table forcefully. "I knew it. I knew that man was trouble. Mindy, you can't." "I can, and I will." She raised her chin, her voice firm. "I'm going to live my life, Elias, finally, and you can't stop me. You're being foolish. You're letting lust cloud your judgment." "It's not lust," she cut in, her voice rising. "It's love. Something you'll never understand because you chose God instead of living." Elias's face turned red. "Watch what you say, Mindy." "Or what? You'll kick me out? Do it, please, because I'm leaving anyway." She left the kitchen before he could respond, went upstairs to her room and began separating the few things she wanted to take. There wasn't much. A few dresses, the comb Jack had made, the Bible her mother had given her, and a heart full of hope. Sunday dawned clear, cloudless, as if the sky wanted to witness what was about to happen. Mindy dressed carefully, not her usual black dress, but the dark blue she'd worn on Saturday. She let her hair down, pinning back just a few strands with the comb Jack had made. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw not the forgotten widow, but the woman who'd chosen to live. The church was full when she arrived. People whispered when they saw her. The loose hair, the different dress, the brightness in her eyes. But she didn't lower her head. She walked down the center aisle with her head held high, sat in her usual pew, and waited. Elias climbed to the pulpit with a closed expression. He didn't look at her during the entire sermon, but she felt the tension emanating from him. He knew something was about to happen. The sermon was about obedience, about resisting the temptations of the flesh, about the danger of straying from God's path. Every word was an arrow directed at her, but Mindy didn't flinch, just waited. And then, in the middle of the sermon, the church door opened. Jack walked in. The silence was instant and absolute. Every head turned, every eye fixed on the tall, broad man who walked down the aisle with firm, determined steps, his hat in his hands, his eyes fixed on only one person, Mindy. Elias stopped mid-sentence, his face turning red. "What do you think you're doing?" Jack didn't answer him, just kept walking until he stopped right in front of the pew where Mindy sat. He extended his hand to her. "Come with me," he said, his voice firm, clear, for everyone to hear. The murmuring began immediately, shocked, scandalized. But Mindy heard nothing but his voice and her own heart beating wildly in her chest. She looked at the extended hand, then at his face, and saw everything there, the love, the determination, the promise of a future together. "Mindy!" Elias's voice exploded from the pulpit. "Don't you dare!" But she dared. She stood slowly, her eyes never leaving Jack's, and placed her hand in his. The murmuring turned to shouting. People stood up. Elias descended from the pulpit like thunder, his face twisted with rage. "You can't do this. You're shaming your husband's memory. You're shaming this family. You're shaming God." Mindy turned to her brother, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel afraid of him. She felt pity. "I'm not shaming anyone, Elias. I'm choosing to live, something you never let me do. This man is a stranger. You know nothing about him. I know everything I need to know." She squeezed Jack's hand. "He sees me. He respects me. He loves me, and I love him too." The church exploded in reactions, some shocked, others scandalized, a few with looks of understanding. Elias took a step forward, threatening. Jack immediately placed Mindy behind him, his large body forming a protective barrier. "Don't you dare touch her," Jack said, his voice low but loaded with a clear threat. "Who do you think you are?" Elias shouted. "I'm the man who's going to take care of her, protect her, love her the way she deserves." Jack didn't back down an inch. "And if anyone here has anything against that, say it now or accept it in silence." The silence that followed was heavy, tense. Mindy felt tears well up, but not from sadness, from relief. Finally, someone was fighting for her. Finally, someone was putting her first. "You're going to regret this," Elias hissed, looking at Mindy over Jack's shoulder. "When he abandons you, when you realize you made a mistake, don't come looking for me." Mindy stepped out from behind Jack, standing beside him, hands joined. "I won't regret it. For the first time in my life, I'm doing something for myself. And if that's a sin, then may God forgive me. But I'm not giving him up." She looked around the church, at the people she'd known her whole life, at the judgmental faces, at the looks full of opinion, and then said loud and clear, "Jack Monroe is my life now, and I'm going with him today." She turned to Jack, held his face between her hands, and pulled him into a kiss. There, in front of everyone, without shame, without fear, just pure and true love. The church exploded in protests, but she didn't care, because when she pulled away and looked into his eyes, she saw everything she needed to see. "Let's go," she whispered. Jack smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that was only hers. He took her hand, and they walked down the center aisle side by side, ignoring the shouts, the protests, the judgments. When they walked out the church door, the sun hit their faces hard. Jack stopped on the steps, turned to her, and held her face with such tenderness that tears finally fell freely. "Are you sure, absolutely? Because after this, there's no going back." "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she replied, smiling through the tears. Jack pulled her into a tight embrace, kissing her forehead, her hair, her cheeks. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making you happy, I promise. You already are." He lifted her in his arms, as if she weighed nothing, and walked to where his horse waited. He placed her in the saddle, then mounted behind her, enveloping her completely with his strong arms. "Where are we going?" she asked, leaning back against his chest. "Anywhere you want." Mindy looked back one last time, at the church, at the town, at the life she was leaving behind. She didn't feel sadness, didn't feel regret, felt only freedom. She turned forward, covering Jack's hands with hers, and smiled. "Then let's go home." "Where is home?" "Wherever you are." Jack leaned in, kissing the top of her head, and then, with a gentle touch to the horse's flanks, they rode away. The town watched in shock as they disappeared down the dusty road, two bodies intertwined, two souls who'd finally found each other. And for the first time in 3 years, Mindy Harper, no, Mindy Monroe, she decided right then, truly smiled. Because she was no longer forgotten, no longer alone, no longer dead inside. She was alive, and in his words, whispered softly in her ear as they rode toward the horizon, "You're small, but you fit perfectly in me, in my body, in my heart, in my life. And I'm never letting you go." And she never wanted him to. Sometimes we spend our whole lives waiting for permission to live, waiting for someone to see us, choose us, tell us we deserve to be happy. Mindy waited 3 years in the shadows, dressed in mourning not just for a man who was gone, but for herself. Until Jack arrived, not to save her, but to remind her that she always had the power to save herself. He just extended his hand. She was the one who chose to take it. This isn't just the story of a forbidden love. It's the story of a woman who decided that living wasn't a sin, that being touched, desired, loved wasn't shameful. It was a right. Jack and Mindy didn't just run away from the town. They ran from judgment, from guilt, from the invisible chains that bind us when we let others define who we should be. And maybe, deep down, this story also speaks to us. Of all the times we've hidden, of all the times we said no when we wanted to say yes, of all the times we chose safety instead of life. Because sometimes all someone needs is to be seen, and to have the courage to let themselves be seen. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and become a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, also click the Super Thanks button. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us keep bringing stories that move you. Comment below and tell us where you're listening from and share. Would you have had Mindy's courage? Would you choose love even knowing the price?